Okay, this is part 5 of a 7-part series on the multiplication of two numbers example problem for CIS122. We need to create, and this part is on the test plan. We need to create a test plan. I suggest you do it prior to coding, and actually I think of it quite often as part of the logic solution, although it probably is somewhere in between. It has aspects of the logic and the physical problem. But what I find is when I create the test plan prior to do the coding, example problems that I put in, oftentimes I think, well, I haven't accounted for that, or it reminds me of something that I didn't take care of, or brings up a question that I have to go to the user and ask. So it's much better to find out those questions and to resolve them prior to doing the VBA code in this case than to proceed on. So I like to do at least the first part of the test plan and get it ready before I go to code. The things that you put in the test plan are random tests, tests for limits, high range, 0, low range, negative values if they're appropriate. You're testing not only for things that you expect that there will be a valid outcome, but you're also testing for errors that the user wanted you to test for. So there's a lot of reasons to create tests, and we are going to have one column in the test plan devoted to the reason for each test, because sometimes the test can be 35, 40 elements long, and you oftentimes can't remember why a certain test is there when you actually get to the VBA code. You can't test for everything. If you tried to do that, you might be sitting here for an awfully long time, and you'd be fired long before you ever got to that point. So when you test for those things which you think that occur to you, that you've talked to the user and perhaps they pointed out things that have been a problem for them in the past. So you test for all those things you can think of. Fairly exhaustive test, but nonetheless, there always be perhaps some obscure things that will happen later on that will you have to adjust the code after the fact, after you get into production. So we're going to put in the input columns first. Oftentimes I do this in a spreadsheet, but we're going to try to avoid that this term so that we can have everything in one document to hand in. And in most of the cases there won't be a whole lot of input and output stuff, but where there seems to be an inordinate amount of something, you could use a spreadsheet and attach that. I think some of the second level challenge problems later on have that. But we're going to put in columns for the input right now because we have to show what input we're going to be in the test to produce the requested output. So I'm going to produce columns. That's why I suggest maybe a spreadsheet would be appropriate for this as well. These columns are for the actual test values that we'll put in for num1 and num2 in this case. The next thing we're going to want to do is to have expected output. What is it that we should get when we put in the num1, num2 test values? What should we get or expect to have for the output? And then the actual product that we'll get when we run the code after we've written it in our test to see if it actually does produce that. And then the last column, as I said, is the reason for the test so that we don't forget why the test is there. With this particularly small problem of multiplying two numbers together, I don't think we'll have to necessarily put anything in there, but because it'll be rather obvious why the test is being done, there will be so few of them. But in a normal situation, you'd have anywhere from 50, 100, 200 tests being done, and you'd need to fill in the reason for test column. Okay, I'm going to underline this so it's different than what comes later, and now we're going to put in some values. I often put in random values at first just to make sure that things are coming out the way they are supposed to. And then we might put in some zero tests. And if we had an upper limit, we might put in some upper limit tests. For instance, the user says there shouldn't be any num1s or num2s over 25,000. We could put in a test for num1 of 25,000 and a test for num2 of 25,000 to make sure it works. And then maybe 25,001 just to see that it doesn't work. It's not supposed to work. But we don't have an upper limit on this particular application, so we won't do that. We do, or it is the case that we want to be able to handle decimal numbers, let's say, in this application, so we'll put some of those in. You may want to have a calculator handy to figure out those. And then some negative numbers. And this pretty much wraps up the values that we might want to use in this particular application as a test. Certainly we could put in more random values and more decimal numbers, etc. But this will probably work for what we need. If it works in random cases, it probably will work for all cases in between and that sort of thing. So we've covered a lot of ground with these tests. Once we have a program running, we will put these values in and capture as much of it as we can to the output screen, and then paste that into Word for any lab assignment that you're doing. So we'll see how to do that later. And this ends part 5 of the 7-part series on the multiplication of two numbers in CIS122, the test plan.